Before we start, I was thinking of making a best of the decade list for the 2010s in terms of film. And before I do that, there are still a few that I want to see, so it'll probably be a little ways away. I still want to see Midsummer, Marriage Story, Leviathan, Parasite, a few more, just so I can really make sure I get it, because I want it to be an objective list. So if you have any films that from the 2010s that you think I should see, feel free to let me know. Anyways, here we go with the video. I had a pretty busy last semester, so I didn't make as much time as I'd like to for my favorite pastime, watching films. And so, during my 23-day long Christmas break, I decided, well, I'll sit down and I'll watch some. Now, from the 13th to the 5th, I actually was able to watch 33 films, and just for fun, I thought I'd rank, score them, and review each of them with my honest opinion. And obviously, if your opinion's different, that's great. That means you can actually enjoy cinema instead of nitpicking every detail that the director chose, or how you don't like the editing or score, or the pacing of the film is off, whatever have you. The point is, this is my opinion. If you like the films I don't like, good on you. If you don't like the films that I like, well, I can't help you there. Let's dive right in. 33. Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. 2.5. I feel like I need to preface this. I'm not a huge Star Wars fan. And this is the key to Elijah's house. Whoa. Hear me out. I grew up in an age where Star Wars saturated the market everywhere. I mean, we had the best Star Wars games, we had the best expanded universe material. The prequels were just coming out, and you could go see them in theaters. Notice how I didn't put best in front of those. The point is, Star Wars was everywhere. It was in my pajamas, it was in my room, it was on my friends' keys. And that's worn off on me. Star Wars has become such a part of our zeitgeist and our culture that even I have to appreciate just how it's stuck around. That being said, there's really only 2 good Star Wars films in my eyes. And there's really only 4 or 5 that I would ever rewatch and really enjoy. So that being said, I have an appreciation, but I have a job to do as a film reviewer. I actually saw this in the theater with Peter and Elijah, and we were struggling for sure. This film is really bogged down with issues, and that's too bad, because I think it could have been redeemed into something a lot better. But the fact of the matter is, it has huge pacing issues. The plot feels really contrived and out of nowhere. The writing is corny and not very good at parts. The directing I'm not a fan of. I don't think I really like J.J. Abrams. And it's pretty clear that Disney has messed this film up quite a bit. It just definitely was not the film for me. I remember walking out of the theater with Peter and Elijah, and we just trashed on it. Let me go over some things I did like, though, because it's obviously not a 0 out of 10. The sound effect when the Emperor shoots lightning, you know, the one that goes... Fantastic. 10 out of 10. I think that's all I liked about the film. I should move on. 32. Jumanji, The Next Level. 3 out of 10. We, Peter, Elijah, and I actually went to the theater to see Star Wars, but we were a day early, and so we ended up watching Jumanji instead and Star Wars 2 days later. And I am really just surprised to say that Jumanji was more enjoyable. Why? Let's start out with things I liked. The weird zoom-in on Danny DeVito at the end, when he did the face, fantastic, made the whole film. Other than that, it was very bland, it was very repetitive. I didn't see the first one, and I felt lost. Again, just not the film for me. There didn't feel like there was any substance or meaning, a lot like Star Wars earlier. I didn't take away any major themes, and it felt like my entire viewing of the film was pointless. I didn't learn anything in terms of filmmaking language. I didn't learn anything in terms of themes. There was nothing I could apply to my life that could better me from watching these films. And that's why they're the bottom of the barrel. Moving on. 31. Plus minus. 4.5 out of 10. There's not much to say about this. It's an experimental short film. And if you just want to say, oh, Dylan, you hate experimental films, stick with this list and you'll see that that's not true. It's probably my second favorite genre of all time when it comes to film. See if you can guess the first. And also, I've actually been working on my own experimental short film for about a month now. It'll probably be done in April. If you think some of these are hard to sit through, get ready for that. This one just felt like there was not a lot of substance. It was very cool at points, but it was very short, and it felt like other films had done a similar thing better. But that being said, it was cool, it was enjoyable, it's only 6 minutes. So if you do want to check it out, I would recommend it, I suppose. It's just not something I'd ever find myself rewatching. Number 30, Bubba Hotep. 4.5 out of 10. The last 30 minutes of this film are so fantastic and funny. The rest of the film is incredibly boring, and I was pretty much asleep. And that's the problem. I find it hard to forgive when there's two jarring parts that are different in a film. That being said, the last 30 minutes were so incredibly fun that I felt I did have to score it above plus and minus just because I was enthralled, and it was more than 6 minutes. But other than that, this is not a film I would recommend. Read the synopsis. If it sounds like a film you'll like, you'll probably end up liking it. I think that's a fair way to explain it. 29. Inauguration of the Pleasure Dome. Oh boy. 4.5 out of 10. I don't get this. I really don't. It has really cool visuals that I think I learned a lot cinematically from, but in terms of everything else, it just felt very uncomfortable and strange, and I was mostly confused. That being said, it was interesting and engaging enough that I was paying attention for most of its 38-minute runtime. So for that, I'll give it credit. At least a little bit. And here we are, another experimental film. Anyways, 28. Star Wars, Episode 7, The Force Awakens. 5 out of 10. I just feel like I really don't like J.J. Abrams. I don't remember if I watched this film in theaters. I think I did, and I might have fallen asleep. I tried to watch this over break with my brother, and I did fall asleep. It's just really not the film for me. It's pretty much fan service, the film. And once again, I felt like I was getting no thematic value out of it. But at least this one had some interesting ideas, and I could say the pacing was pretty good. The writing occasionally was good. I didn't like the directing, but that's just me. I would say most people would rate this higher, but for me, it just wasn't there. I think it's probably the blandest of all the three films, though, so that's pretty interesting. Anyways, number 27, Fear and Desire, 5 out of 10. Stanley Kubrick's first film is a disaster by most accounts. It's incredibly boring, and I would say its saving grace is it's only an hour long. But there's definitely some competence to be seen there, and it has some interesting shots. I don't know. It was watchable, but it's not something I would regularly or probably ever revisit. But it was fun the first time, I guess. 26. Spitzenhorstanter. I think this is actually called Eaton Horizons in English. I don't know. Anyways, 5 out of 10. Another experimental short film, what a surprise. This one, this one got me. This one's a lot like Eraserhead, and it's only 4 minutes, and I love it. So why'd I give it a 5 out of 10? Well, if you ask me, maybe it's a 5.5. Depends on the day. This is one I definitely recommend watching. It's only 4 minutes long. Not a huge waste. Very interesting. Very cool stuff. A lot to take away. But at the end of the day, it just feels like the prototypical experimental film, which is probably why I gave it a 5, because it doesn't feel like it's adding anything to this genre. But still very good. 25. Pas de deux. 5 out of 10. This film has some really cool image effects, after image effects. It's very cool to see the dancers do a dance, then pause, the film catch up. And again, it's only 13 minutes, so if you sit around and watch it, it's not like you're wasting your time. Very cool visuals, worth a watch. Not a lot of substance there, but definitely some cool effects that keep you involved and engaged. And the choreography to the dance is pretty good too. 24. To Catch a Thief. 5 out of 10. Oh boy, I ended up watching quite a bit of Hitchcock over the break, and this one is not one that I liked. To put it bluntly, it's pretty boring, and it didn't really do anything for me. Going into the film, I thought Grace Kelly was actually going to be the jewel thief, but otherwise it felt really cheesy and kind of soapy, and almost very similar to the next Hitchcock film I'll talk about when I get there. But the love story, I didn't feel it, and the whole film, there wasn't a lot to take away. Maybe don't steal, love beats crime, I don't know. I'll probably not end up rewatching this one. The only real saving grace was Hitchcock's directing, which is always incredibly interesting, no matter what. So moving on. 23. Dead Ringers. 6 out of 10. This is actually the first Cronenberg film that I've ever seen, and I'm very interested to see something else, either Naked Lunch, Videodrome, maybe A History of Violence. Because this was a very bizarre film. I think it's definitely a film I can relate to more than the previous ones. Just the strange atmosphere that it presents throughout is really interesting. I thought they were going to do this thing where they kind of become one person, or they always were one person. And they almost did that at the end with the exam and both their subsequent deaths, but I don't know. It was a film that I did enjoy, but I probably wouldn't watch again. But it has made me interested to watch other Cronenberg films. The Fly, that's the other one I gotta watch. Anyways, pretty good film. I'd say worth your time the first time. 22, Mindscape, 6 out of 10. Well, we're back to the short films, and this one is so incredibly good. Just to see all the work that went in with all those pins and the final end-up product makes you so incredibly happy. It's really interesting to see the picture come together with all these small pieces. This is definitely something I'd recommend because it's 8 minutes, it doesn't take you long, and it will possibly blow you away. That being said, it is too short to merit top 15, top 10 position, and it ends up here at a 6 out of 10 because at the end of the day, I didn't take away all that much, but the animation's cool, the story is pretty interesting. It's definitely a film worth your time, even if you're not me. 21. Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. So it's been 2 years since The Last Jedi came out, and I still hadn't seen it, and Elijah went, well, I got the Blu-ray, let's go watch it. So I sat down and I watched it the first time, and I went, that was pretty decent. I think I'd rank it below Rogue One. And I thought about it, and then I ended up watching The Force Awakens again, like I said, and then we went and saw the new one, and I thought, wow, as a standalone film, The Last Jedi is so much better than all those. Sure, it kind of derails the trilogy as a whole, but so does the last film, so does it really matter? I think Rian Johnson is really good at what he does, and what he does is he makes films that you watch the first time and you go, yeah, that was all right. And then days pass and you go, wait a minute. That was better than all right. This same thing happened with Looper. It happened with Brick. I haven't seen Knives Out, but from what I hear, it kind of happens like that. So I give respect to the guy. I really do like him a lot. That being said, there's a lot wrong with The Last Jedi. The writing for the females is really bad. I think the females' performances are fine, but the lines that they give them are terrible. The comedy can definitely break up a scene at points, and there's a lot of other things that I assume Disney put in that kind of ruined the film more or less. That being said, there's also a lot to like, though, so I am really conflicted on just exactly how I feel about this film. I ended up watching it a second time over break without sound for a reason that you will see later. But the point is, sound is such an important part of filmmaking. I would say it's maybe the most important part to me. So for me to enjoy a film without sound, I gotta give the film credit. And I did enjoy it without sound, so I will give it credit. And actually, if you ask me now, I would tell you this is the best Star Wars film that Disney has put out. And that's that. My opinion may change again. I don't know. 20. Uncut Gems. 6.2 out of 10. This is another film I saw in the theater with Peter. And actually, I've seen more films in the theater over break than I have in probably the past 3 years, which is crazy. This was a really interesting one for me because we didn't go see a goofy blockbuster. We went and saw a film that was actually on my list because the Safdie brothers are people that I admire as people, although I haven't really seen any of their work. This film was very tense, and I will give them a lot of credit for that because it had me at the edge of my seat the whole time. I felt like I really did learn something at the end. It had great performances. Some of the lines were a little silly, but I know that it's that way because they want to be realistic. All the dialogue felt like it was, in fact, real-life dialogue, which is something I appreciate, although it made me uncomfortable at times a little bit. I think this is a film I would probably revisit because I'm not sure I figured it out the first time, which means my rating might actually end up going up. But it's probably the second best film I've seen all year behind The Lighthouse. Not much else to say, so I'll just move on. 19. North by Northwest. 6.3 out of 10. Here's the other Hitchcock film I was talking about. And the thing is, I hate the first part of this film. I was going to give it a 4 or a 5 out of 10 during the first part. And then the second part came, and I was going to give it a 7 out of 10. But I hate that. Films shouldn't be like that. I ended up compromising because the second part was incredibly good. But I still have a lot of problems with this film. The bourbon scene is so incredibly silly and stupid in my mind. Cary Grant's acting felt unnatural to me. I don't know. The love story feels really contrived and stupid when you look at it. Falling in love at first sight and breaking your cover because of that. I don't know. It just didn't work with me. I had a few other issues with the film, but all in all, it was enjoyable, and I can definitely see how it's a Hitchcock classic. The thing that interests me the most is how this came out before From Russia with Love, but it has so many of the same elements. The crop dusting, or at least the plane trying to crash into our spy character, only to crash itself. A train with the bad guy and the love interest, kind of the whole honeypot idea. And From Russia with Love is one of my favorite films of all time, definitely my favorite Bond. So it was really interesting to see those comparisons. I don't know if the book came out before, if it borrowed from that, but really something interesting to note, I think. 18. Bicycle Thieves. This neo-realist classic is something that I liked a fair amount, but not a lot. It's a 6.5 out of 10, mostly because, I don't know, maybe it got a little too real. I think when it comes to filmmaking, I'm very much a surrealist or somewhere around there, so the neo-realist films aren't exactly things that resonate with me. I can definitely see how Uncut Gems or another film like that flows into this one, how they are similar and how they're both realist in their style. But it's not my favorite type of film. That being said, there's a lot to take away from this film, and I think the ending really cements that. And I definitely see why this is a classic and why it has inspired so many other people. And I definitely think it's a film that I needed to see. Number 17, A Field in England, 6.5 out of 10. This is one of those incredibly strange films. This is where we get to almost full-length experimental films, but not quite. I really like how simplistic this film is in its location and its characters. And I really like how it shapes the world around this singular place and this really singular event. It was a film that drew my attention in and kept it the entire time, and it's definitely not going to be a film for everyone. In fact, it probably has a fairly limited audience because of just how strange it is. That being said, there's a lot to this film, and I think there's a lot to take away about the afterlife, about religion, about our relationship with the past. And I think it's a film that is worth watching if you get the time. That being said, it is very strange, and I can understand why you don't like it. 16, The Birds, 6.5 out of 10. Of all the Hitchcock I watched over break, this is definitely my favorite. The coastal location looks beautiful and it's enthralling, and something about it just draws you into the film and makes you really intrigued about both the characters and their situation. The birds themselves are pretty boring creatures made to be completely terrifying, which is very interesting. There's a lot of shots that great build-up tension, like the birds slowly accumulating on the playground. I definitely see Hitchcock at work here, and I think there's a lot of fun to be had by almost anyone watching. My biggest problem with the film, and I think the biggest takeaway, is just how the rear projection, which I assume is what it is, has aged. It doesn't look that good, and there's a lot of times where I really had to suspend my disbelief in order to stay in the story. That being said, if you are able to get past this disbelief, there's a lot in that story. It's an incredibly interesting story, bizarre. I think it's Hitchcock definitely hitting his stride here. I mean, this is, his fifth masterpiece in a row at this point in his career, and it really shows. I don't think it's quite on the level as something as Vertigo, Psycho, or Notorious, but I think it is an interesting Hitchcock film and definitely one that most people will enjoy. I think it's fairly accessible in terms of horror, in terms of just film in general. I think a lot of people can enjoy this, and I think a lot of people should enjoy this. There's a lot to take away under the layers of pulpy Hitchcock goofiness. 15, Whiplash, 7 out of 10. I was really surprised I hadn't seen this film before because Elijah and I were both on Drumline. Elijah obviously plays the drum set, and he's fantastic at it. I have been known to play the drum set, and I've also been known to not be so good at it. The point is that this film sort of connects with me. I like to associate our drum instructor with Fletcher because it's funny. I like to think about our instructor saying these things, our band director. But the truth is, he definitely wasn't even close to being that mean. This was a film that was interesting. It kept the tension up in a very interesting way. It felt almost like a Hitchcock film because it took something that on the surface seems banal and maybe rudimentary to those who aren't experienced with it, that being band, that being drumming, and it makes it this tense and almost scary thing. It's definitely an interesting film, and I am really surprised it's taken me this long to get around to it. Not one of my all-time favorites, and as you see later, there is actually a film by this director I like better. But I would definitely recommend this. I think most people can enjoy this, if not for the drumming, then for Fletcher's nonstop put-downs and comments that just make this film such an entertaining watch. It really is a modern classic, in my opinion. 14, La Cabina, 7 out of 10. If you thought Whiplash was tense, whoa, have I got a film for you. It's really amazing how this film builds so much tension out of a man being trapped in a phone box. And at first it's boring and it's banal, and then suddenly you're in the thick of it and things are getting crazier and crazier until the end. And for only being 35 minutes long, I think a lot of people could watch this, would enjoy this, and should watch this. It's a fairly easy watch. It's not incredibly complicated, but it is a tension-building short that just pays off so much in the end. 13. Now picture this. It's Christmas Eve, and I watch It's a Wonderful Life. The next day is Christmas. I'm so happy. And what do I follow it up with? The unstoppable Christmas classic that is The Exorcist. 7.5 out of 10. It's actually really funny. I watched It's a Wonderful Life and The Exorcist back-to-back on Christmas Eve and Christmas, mostly because they're two films that I definitely should have seen by now, being a huge horror fan and a huge film buff, and they're two films that I haven't seen by now. That being said, let's score this Christmas classic first, because that's where we're at in the list. This is a very good horror film. When people say it's the scariest film of all time, I don't agree with them. That being said, there's a lot going for this film. The effects, the tension, the atmosphere, the story, the cinematography, the slow-building documentary-style directing of William Friedkin. There's just so much to enjoy about this film, and I find it really funny. The scariest part of the film is easily the medical treatment. I don't know if that's just me, but I find it pretty funny. That being said, at the end of the day, there are horror films I like to watch more. There are ones that scare me more. And overall, I just say this is a pretty good film, but certainly not the peak of horror, in my opinion. 12. La Strada. If you haven't noticed, I really have a thing for Fellini, and particularly his almost Martin Scorsese-esque, unlikable character investigations, if you will. La Strada is definitely my least favorite of the ones I've seen, but that being said, it is fantastic. It is a 7.5 out of 10. There's a lot going for this film. It may be a little slow at the start, but once you get into it, it's incredibly interesting in how these characters evolve. One going from a hopeful, very up-and-up character to someone who's very distraught and broken and beaten, and a character who starts that way, almost comes up, but then just returns right back to where he started. Then, of course, there's the fool who kind of follows along on this emotional journey. There's definitely a lot to like about this film, and I think most people can enjoy it. It's fairly short. There is a lot going for it. There's a lot to pull away, a lot of themes, and they're fairly straightforward. They're not buried deep within this complex web. There's something that you can take into your everyday life and something you can understand. You can identify with the characters' hardships, with all they're going through, all their problems, all of it. And because of that, I think it's definitely a film that deserves recognition and praise. And not just because it was from Fellini, but that's definitely a big part of it. "11. Suspiria, 2018, 7.5 out of 10. This is the kind of remake that we need. Also, can I just start off by saying, why does it feel like the Suspiriorum sequence of this film was directed by me? Seriously, though. Okay, this is the most recent film I've seen, so it's probably the one I remember the most. It's the one that I have the least amount of things to talk about. Mostly because it's a film that you should just go watch. If you like the original Suspiria, you might like this. If you like horror films, you might like this. Honestly, it's definitely not a film for everyone. It's very complicated. There's a lot going on. And it's kind of funny. The original Suspiria is very much style over substance. And this film, they add loads of substance, and you think, oh, that's all this is. But then the style just takes over at the end. It's a very interesting, I don't want to say slow burning, but disturbing and meticulous horror film that just slowly peels away levels until you're revealed with what is really terrifying and what is really there. It's a very good film. Is it the best film of 2018? No. Is it the best horror film of 2018? No. Is it the best horror film of 2018 that I watched over break? No. 10. A Boy and His Dog. 7.5 out of 10. This really does feel like the estranged stepbrother to Logan's Run, or the other way around. I really like Blood. Why do I really like Blood? Well, he's pretty much me. He's a character filled with a bunch of pointless knowledge that will never be important, but he stores in his head, and he's a condescending prick. Of course I love him. No, this film just really resonated with me. It's probably the most Harlan Ellison has ever Ellisoned. And being a huge fan of him, I really related this to almost Demon with a Glass Hand and sort of the, I Have No Mouth, but I Must Scream, but it really is something on its own. And I do think this might be his best story. Maybe. It's certainly one that I enjoyed a lot, and it's certainly one that I'll probably end up revisiting. And not so much in a reluctant way like I do with Logan's Run, but in a way where I actually adore the film and want to watch it again. That being said, maybe I should watch Logan's Run again. Oh boy, here I go again. 9. Outer Space. 7.5 out of 10. This may very well be the greatest experimental film ever made, period. I don't want to try and pronounce his name, but Cherkasky's editing is absolutely fantastic. The way he's able to piece together this already pre-created film into something so different and so visceral and such a just testament to what filmmaking can be, almost what it should be at its core, is really fantastic. I think this film is incredibly meta because I think the themes that you're going to pick up on are going to be about filmmaking, about editing, about how something already existing can become something so entirely different through a very regimented process. And I think it's a film everyone should experience because, again, it's 10 minutes long. It's not going to put you out. Well, mentally it might. But in terms of time, I think most people have the time to sit down and watch it. It's definitely not going to be for most people. It's going to be for very few people, but it's a film that really teaches you what filmmaking can be if you push it far enough. And that's why it's so important. It's the experimental film that pushed the boundary, I don't want to say as far as it can go, but as far as it can go. And because of that, I've learned a lot in terms of filmmaking, and I think film has grown and learned a lot in terms of filmmaking. So it's a great film. It's a great film. What do you want? 8. Hereditary. 7.5 out of 10. This is probably the 5th most disturbing film I've ever seen. It had me uncomfortable almost the entire way through, and I absolutely adored it. I haven't seen Midsommar, but I really want to now because I really like Ari Aster's camera choices, his choices of grading here. I don't know who his cinematographer is, but I'd give him loads of credit. This film just gave off such an atmosphere that had me so incredibly uncomfortable and unnerved the entire time. It definitely reminded me of something like Texas Chainsaw, in how there's just this growing unease, maybe under the skin like that as well, because it really got under my skin. But this is a horror film for modern horror fans. It's a film that really haunted me after watching it, and just thinking about it makes it even more confusing and deep and really just interesting. I don't know what else I have to say about it except that it's, again, not a film for everyone. 7. Die Hard. 7.7 out of 10. You know, after all of these, sometimes you just gotta sit down with your family and watch the greatest Christmas masterpiece, remastered in 4K, Die Hard. Despite all my claims of being a cinephile and a critic, there's no denying Die Hard is fantastic. It's got so many quotable lines. It's probably the most pure an action film can be. It's got heart, even though it doesn't matter, let's be honest. It's got jokes, it's got guns, it's got explosions, it's got everything that you could ever want, and it does it really well in a succinct, well-paced, well-written, well-shot, and just interesting film that you can revisit over and over and over again and claim to be a Christmas movie, even though it's certainly not. The fact is that Die Hard is never going to get old because it's a film that can be enjoyed by everyone at any time, no matter how many times you've seen it before. 6. Suspiria. 7.8 out of 10. I think around a year ago or so, I started watching this film and then I stopped because I didn't understand the giallo style. I wasn't a big fan of the dubs, and at the time I was watching it on this very bizarre, weird stretched aspect ratio that felt really uncomfortable and unnecessary, and so I decided it just wasn't a film for me. Now, over break, I decided to revisit it because I found it on the proper aspect ratio, and actually the sound was corrected from the weird version I had watched. Of course, it was still dubbed, but my version before had weird sound issues with the soundtrack and just the mixing in general. And I can tell you this is easily one of my favorite horror films of all time because it's so unique. And that's why the remake really struck me, because they're very different films. The remake is a film that I very much enjoyed from a strange experimental standpoint, and Suspiria is very much a film I enjoy from a pulpy horror standpoint. And that being said, there's just something about the original that I feel like you can't beat. The slow buildup of the investigation, the over-the-top nature of the giallo murder style where you get to see all this blood and knives going into hearts. You see all these bright colors or people falling into rooms filled with barbed wire. There's just something charming about the horror in the classic that can't beat for me. And I'm so glad I decided to rewatch this over break because it has easily become one of my all-time favorite films of all time. It's in the top 100. It is a film that I will be glad to revisit, to rewatch, to understand. And the only exception is Tom York or Goblin in terms of the soundtrack. Very conflicted. Radiohead, one of my favorite bands, but I think I gotta go with Goblin. Number 5, LA Land. Alright, fine, La La Land. 7.9 out of 10. Damien Chazelle is hitting it out of the park for me, but this is definitely where he hits his stride. There's just something about this film that really grabs me. And the funny thing is, I was worried about it being a musical. And the first time through I went, that was a really good film, but the music really disrupted it for me. And then the next day I found myself humming the songs. And the day after that, I found myself learning the songs on the piano. And soon as you know it, I'm listening to the soundtrack all day, every day. There is a lot to say about this film, but I want to keep it short because this video is already long as it is. So I will say that this film, without a doubt, no hyperbole, has one of my favorite endings to any film ever. Moving on. 4. Martin. 8 out of 10. Oh boy, Martin. This is definitely not a film for everyone, but there's something that I like about this film so much, and it might just be George Romero's nihilistic, cynical approach to everything, how even his vampire can't be romanticized. It has to be this tore-down, realistic approach, and you go, is he even a vampire? I love the black and white, either flashbacks or romanticized versions of these situations. Probably my favorite part of the film in terms of lines is when the guy is trying to talk to Martin because he thinks it's the woman's wife, and the woman goes, I don't know him. And then, of course, there's the end, which is so incredibly perfect. This is a film that's not going to work for everyone. It's a film I really enjoy because, as Martin says himself, there really is no magic. It just looks like it. It's a trick. There's no magic, really. Such a great film. One of my favorites. 1977, what a year. 3. The Social Network. 8 out of 10. I actually watched this film with my brother, who absolutely despises film and pretty much falls asleep or leaves during any of them. And he said this is easily one of his favorite films and the best of this century. So I guess that tells you something. I really love how Fincher and this story work together. I think this is definitely the story he needed to take. Fight Club I still think is better, but this is a David Fincher story, in the same way that Zodiac is a David Fincher story. It just feels like his style and the story really fit together. I love the pacing of this film. The writing is so whip-sharp and interesting. There's just so much going for this film, and the ending is so incredibly tragic, yet uplifting. I like how it takes a non-biased approach to the side. You don't see Mark Zuckerberg painted as a villain, but you don't see him painted as a hero. It's pretty neutral, and you get to decide if he's in the wrong or if he's in the right. Very interesting film, great performances, great directing, and the soundtrack by Trent Reznor is really good as well. 2. Barry Lyndon. 8 out of 10. I'm almost done. All right. Barry Lyndon was actually the first film I watched during break on that very first day. And the reason I didn't watch any other films that day is because Barry Lyndon is 12 and a half hours long. Okay, no, not really. It's 3. But it is a very long film, and it's not a film for everyone. I really like Stanley Kubrick, and I used to not like Stanley Kubrick, but just like his films, the more I think about him, the better that he gets. Weird like that. Anyways, Barry Lyndon, I think, is best appreciated as this satire of high society, but there's a lot else going on. The whole fate versus free will theme that underlies the whole film, how all these bad choices lead up to essentially Barry's demise, and oh my God, the cinematography in this film. So fantastic. Obviously, they got the lens from NASA that lets them shoot candlelight and all these other natural lights because it opens with a wider aperture. And thank the Lord they did, because this film is one of the most beautiful of all time. I don't think it's a film I'll be revisiting anytime soon, mainly just because it is so long, and I don't know. It's not a film you watch on the weekend. You really need to sit down. You need to watch it. You need to think about it. And I don't always have time for that, so it's probably one that's going to go on the shelf for a little while. But much like La La Land and Suspiria and Martin, Social Network, Die Hard, all those before, this is another one of my all-time favorites, breaking the top 100. And there's not much else to say. And number 1. Yep, It's a Wonderful Life. It's really crazy I haven't seen this film because it's such a classic, not just in terms of Christmas, but in terms of everything. And I really understand why now. This is easily one of the best films I've ever seen. I'm going to give it an 8+ out of 10, which means it's above an 8, but it's not the 8 that fits into the top 50. If that makes sense. I don't know. My rating system has gone so off the rails. The point is, this is an incredible film. It is definitely one of my favorite I've ever seen. I am so glad that I eventually got around to watching it. And I can see why it's so quoted, why it's so referenced all the time, and why everyone seems to love it. I totally agree with them. There is so much going for this film: the acting, the writing, the pace, the directing, the story, how sweet it is, and just how meaningful it is, how it tells you that life can be this enriching and beautiful thing if you look past all the downtrodden. You'll never know just how big of an impact you have on people. And that's just crazy. That's really something that speaks to me, I think. And that's why it is the best film I've watched over winter break. If you want any more in-depth reviews, you can definitely ask me questions in the comments or on Twitter if you'd like. Maybe in the future we'll end up doing a Darkest Discussion episode on some of these, or maybe just a full-on review. And I think I might end up doing this for the first semester because it was so much fun to watch these films and rank them. And I'm sure the rankings will end up changing a lot too when I think about the films, especially Suspiria, because I watched it tonight. This is the remake, 2018. So yeah, that might move up, that might move down. I don't know. But yeah, any questions, feel free. I'm out.